Following show may shock, disturb, and offend some viewers. The opinions, theories, and facts shared on this podcast are not widely accepted by the brainwashed masses, especially those who find dark humor offensive. Viewer discretion is advised.
Jeffrey Dahmer soaked in blood. The Unabomber blowing up. Waco, Texas, and Heaven's Gates. Aliens modified, meant for apes. JFK shot in the head by the CIA. Bigfoot and the Mothman. Son of Sam talking to dogs again. Witches, ghosts, and goblins. Mysterious noise and hauntings. Dark arts in the skull and bones. Most celebrities are probably cloned. So if you're feeling all alone, crack a beer and get stoned. I welcome you to the podcast Strange Brew. We're here to entertain you. We're here to entertain you.
It's about to get strange.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. Welcome back. I'm Tomcat, aka Tom Thompson, the Raptilian. You can find my music on all music platforms. I'm very excited for this guest that will be a familiar voice for all the people that clearly enjoyed the episode. I can tell by the downloads and the views. So welcome back, Ryan Gable. Do you want to introduce yourself again for the fans that maybe didn't tune into the first episode?
Yeah, thank you for having me back on the show. I'm happy to learn that the show did very well last time. I hope that's a good thing, and the people that really enjoyed it maybe didn't take what I said out of context, because it very well could be taken out of context.
They take everything out of context.
Oh, yes.
People do.
You should have seen this interview I did on I did an interview on InfoWars one time, and the people there took out of context my book collection and found one book they didn't like and painted me as that individual.
What book was it?
It was a book by Archie Brown on the history of communism, the horrible history of communism. Yeah. And the Info Warriors accused me of being a communist because apparently they've never read that book.
What book is it? Because I would love to read it.
It's just called Communism: The Rise and Fall, or I think it's The Rise and Fall of Communism by Archie Brown. He was an Ivy League professor.
Okay.
It's a really good book. So.
Yeah, we'll get into it. Okay, tell everyone, because I'm so excited for this.
That's why I don't have books behind me anymore. You can take things out of context. So anyway, yeah, my name is Ryan Gable, and my show is called The Secret Teachings. I was doing this before it was a popular thing on college radio, and I did a radio stint on WRSO, which was CBS radio in Orlando, and then I've been on a bunch of other networks. My show focuses on symbolism and occultism, theology, anthropology, mythology, etc. I try to apply that to what's happening today, and also trying to find objective context to the past. That's my goal. I'm not trying to convince an audience of a particular point of view. I'm just trying to present things so hopefully we can live more harmoniously together by finding that we have a lot more in common than we have different. That's, I'd say, more recently, that's kind of been my goal with the show. Thank you for having me back on.
Yeah, man, that's a great point of view to have, because like we've covered some controversial stuff on the show, like the protocols, the Weimar Republic, Kalergi plan has been out on Rumble and YouTube. It's not even out on your audio yet. Time this comes out, it will be. But I've chosen to push the boundaries on things, especially recently, because I'm like, I have the platform to do it. I want to really show people like, hey, this is kind of weird what's going on. Even we did the protocols, I really try to do it in a way of like, hey, this is them saying it. We showed videos and clips of obviously the Zionists and stuff that was going on. And like, I always try to be objective, like, why are they saying this? Why is this happening? Why, so and my whole point of view has always been to try to bring people together. There will always be people that have been conditioned and brainwashed to create more and more division and stuff like that, right? But I want to have fun with the show too. At some extent, that's how I started the show. I have so many thoughts when we were like, okay, what could we get into? Because you've been doing this for a long time. I was thinking, just for something to start off fun, maybe before I have some other questions, what do you think about like cryptids? Like, what do you think is behind like the whole cryptid stuff?
Well, that's a good question, an unexpected question. Cryptids.
Yeah, I was thinking, I was like, that would be fun.
I would say that cryptids were one of the, and I don't mean this in a dismissive way, one of the least interesting things to me when I first began. That doesn't mean I wasn't interested. Doesn't mean I'm not interested in cryptids. In fact, my favorite cryptid is Mothman.
Yeah.
because I lived in West Virginia. I've been to Point Pleasant. I have a friend from Point Pleasant too, and Mothman's a really fascinating story. In fact, West Virginia has a bunch of cryptids. We have the Grafton Monster, we have the Snarlygaster, we have the Mothman, and there's a lot of Bigfoots, including around the city that I lived in and went to high school in Morgantown, which is not too far from Grafton. There's a bunch of Bigfoot sightings there because it's very dense forests. It's most of West Virginia. So yeah, I am very interested in cryptids. I think that cryptids, like anything else, can be argued to be anything that you imagine them to be. I've heard that there are connections between Bigfoot sightings and UFO sightings, and I've heard some people suggest that Bigfoots are kind of either connected to, or they're almost in a humorous way, they're almost like a pet of the aliens or something to that effect, which I think is silly. But I've heard that. I've heard that Bigfoots are interdimensional. If you go to a Bigfoot conference, oh boy, do they love to argue. There's a spiritual Bigfoot came from another dimension side, and then there's a Bigfoot as a physical ape creature, and they fight with each other, and they've got their groupies, and that's just a world that I'm fascinated by, but I don't really live much of my life in because
I was just
it
curious. Just
it
curious what you thought because I was listening to our intro and I'm like, I just wanted to see what you thought.
it gets that world gets sillier quicker than
Yes.
I think any other field. But
Yes.
I mean, if you could show me evidence of something, I don't have an issue believing it. I mean, to me, it's just it's a fact. All of these different stories, whether it's Mothman, Bigfoot, Snarlygaster, Skunk Ape, Yeti, like I think they're fascinating. I think that probably has something to do with like if you build a I guess if you build like an understanding of what these things are, like with UFOs or anything else, you've got like a baseline of people misunderstanding what they've seen.
Yeah.
People that, yes, sometimes people are drinking, sometimes people are on drugs, sometimes people misidentify things in the middle of the night. They're in the woods, things get creepy and scary. The lines between reality and fantasy kind of get blurred. And then you build it up, and then you have people that go looking for those things, and then they will find them. And you have people that go looking to disprove those things, and they'll find proof that they don't exist. And you just kind of keep building this thing up and looking at the different layers of it. That's what I try to do. So I guess to answer your question, I'm interested in it. Mothman's one of my favorite stories. I think that Mothman in particular had something to do with the military, or let's say in quotations, the government. Not that it was a government conspiracy, but I think that there was some sort of maybe military involvement with the
Like the
TNT area.
Montauk monster kind of thing where they like maybe developed it or
I think it was maybe more of a hallucination due to
oh
chemicals,
yeah,
drugs,
yeah.
something sprayed, and I think that it also relates in part to the green monster, which is the Braxton monster, one of the more iconic monsters in the
We haven't covered
uh,
him.
cryptid field. Well, I
Mhm.
went to Braxton. Braxton has a museum for the monster. It's a little small museum. It's like an apartment-sized museum,
It's
and,
looking cool.
that is one of the most distinct cryptids I've ever seen. It's fascinating. It's only about 30, maybe I'm getting this wrong, but I think it's about 30 to 45 minutes, maybe within an hour of Point Pleasant, where the Mothman was sighted. So those are very distinct monsters, and that particular one also has a weird military connection because the military claimed it was a satellite that went down, and they actually showed up on the scene, and there was a very weird smell in the air reported by the people that saw it. So I think that there was a military connection to that, and that's just another layer. But those
Yeah,
are some
for
of my
sure.
initial thoughts.
Yeah, and do you think that it is possible that like things like CERN, if they are attempting to like smash particles, all the things that the government and the military, some of their experiments that they've done, um, do you think it's possible that they could um essentially put like take like rip open our reality to like let things in?
Well, it's speculative and it's theoretical. I've
Mm,
speculated on this myself. I mean, it's part of the UFO mythology
yeah,
that you
yeah,
have the atomic bomb tests in, well, you have the history that's official of atomic bomb tests, and then you have the unofficial but documented history of the Germans detonating, I suppose you could call them atomic bombs, disintegration bombs, I think is the term they used You have Italian correspondents. You have German pilots flying Heinkel bombers that saw mushroom clouds, that they were detonating bombs similar to atomic weapons, or their own atomic weapons, before the United States had the bomb. That's a whole nother piece of interesting history with the missing U-boat and the uranium. But if you go beyond that, right after the detonation of those bombs, both at Trinity and also in Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, you have the 2-year window roughly, and then you have the incident with Kenneth Arnold, and you have the Roswell story, all happening within a couple of weeks of each other. So some people have speculated that because of the atomic bombs, they've sent out signals to the universe, or they've opened up dimensional portals or gateways, and that's brought these extraterrestrials, these extra dimensionals into our world, whether it pulled them in by accident or by curiosity or by
Interesting.
concern. It's something that has been part of the UFO mythology for a while. Again, it's speculative and it's theoretical.
Do you personally believe that there is interdimensional beings?
I suppose it would depend on how you define interdimensional beings. I've had experiences since I was a child with things that were written off by family who were mostly Christian, written off mostly as demonic. And then as I learned more and more about the paranormal, or learned more about, let's even say, cryptids, having especially lived in West Virginia, that I started to think, well, maybe it's something different, and maybe it's like, maybe it's some dimensional monster. These ideas are things that I hear on the Discovery Channel, heard on the History Channel, I heard on like Art Bell, and then I sort of developed my own view of it, where it's a case by case basis. I don't have any idea for sure. I would be lying if I said that I did, but I do think that there's a maybe not dimensional, but for lack of a better word, spiritual or etheric or otherworldly, whatever word applies, there's something else happening there. And I think that a lot of it has to do with, and by drugs, I don't mean taking drugs, but it has to do with chemicals and what we would call drugs if they were outside of the body, like DMT, for example.
Yeah, I've told you I did I've done a lot of
Yes.
mushrooms, and I've seen stuff that I can't explain, man. That like that it feels like something's has watched me. I've looked through the fractals because it looks like these translucent, like
That's what they say,
ancient
yes.
patterns. It's like an ancient pattern, like all these like almost tribal patterns. And I've looked through them. I've seen like demonic faces and like essentially told them to get out of my like surrounding, but it's weird. I've watched horror movies in my backyard with near a fire with a projector and felt like a dome surrounding me. I've had so many different experiences the fans know about on mushrooms, and it's weird. Like I feel connected to something different.
See, I've never taken mushrooms. The only
Yeah, you said
mushrooms
that last time.
I eat are shiitake mushrooms. I like
Yeah.
shiitake. That's about it.
Yeah.
But I say that because you've taken them. You've done these types of substances. I've never done those types of substances. And yet, when I was a child, I'd say between the ages of, toddler and probably 10 years old, and even older, I saw the same kinds of things. Now, I don't write a book about it and make up a story like Corey Goode did. However, I'm sure a lot of people have had similar
Yeah.
experiences. And depending on the environment you grew up in, if you're a Christian, you grow up and you think those are demons. If you have parents that are maybe more into I don't know what you would call it, into magic or into supernatural things, and you might call it spirits or ghosts, or whatever environment you grow up in, you have a term for it. Whatever it is that's happening is something that's happening, but we just call it something different. My point being, though, that I had similar experiences. I saw, you use the word tribal, I saw certain tribal type patterns and weird things without ever having taken a substance, without ever having taken a drug. However, I will say that, like most Americans, I had a really awful diet as a child and ate horrible things. And I would imagine that has some contributing power to it. In the same way that if you talk to, I'm not sure how to say this, but if you talk to, I want to say, a real psychic who is very aware of their body and mind, a real psychic will tell you that the more you consume animal products and processed foods, the more that it becomes difficult to access the other side.
That's
Which
what I've
is,
heard too.
yeah, which is part of the tradition in religious spiritual texts. It's part of the tradition in the mystery schools throughout well, Greece and Egypt, et cetera, throughout the world, even all the way over here to Japan, the more you consume of the material world, the more flesh, the more sex, the more alcohol, the more difficult it is to access the spiritual realm. So maybe that had something to do with it as a kid. But then there's also people that produce, their bodies produce extra, for whatever the reason is, excessive amounts, relatively speaking, of DMT, which I think also Graham Hancock pointed this out, that the percentage of the population that have a little bit extra DMT, by whatever relative definition that might be based on, who I think it's like 2% roughly, which correlates to the number of people or the percentage of people that have had alien abduction experiences. So there's it's a correlation. It doesn't mean it has something to do with it, but it's like a 2% thing. So maybe that has something to do with UFO abductions or alien abductions, because most of those, as Jacques Vallée points out in his books, his work, correlate to the old fairy stories and the old mythologies about the little people. And those are very old stories that we've kind of rebranded and retold
People
today.
saying the machine elves and stuff like that is it's always strange to me that there's been people that have had ayahuasca trips that have shared the exact same experience as other people, seeing these like, and that's creepy to me. We did episodes about dreams, of this idea that, like, I mentioned that, like, maybe there's these machine elves, these entities that are trying to keep the simulation going to some extent. But you have people sharing the same experience on these trips, where I've heard about people on mushrooms that will attempt to read each other's thoughts and be able to, who knows if it's just the mushroom trip, but this almost like shared consciousness experience.
Yeah, and if you read the DMT molecule, or the spirit molecule DMT, by Dr. Rick Strassman, who did the DMT studies in New Mexico, he said that most of the people, or I guess it was his assessment, had a different reaction based on their intention or their mindset. So people that might want to read each other's minds or might want to see
Yeah, yeah.
something might be able to do that. Whether that's, quote, real or not is another thing to be said. And then people that had, a perspective of this was scary, obviously had that type of experience. So they really did create their reality even in a clinical setting, which he also says is like half of the experiment is where it's taking place and whether you're safe in that environment or not. So when you factor in that a lot of people do those types of things in, let's call them, unsafe or unstable environments, that's going to affect the outcome as much as the mindset does.
Yeah. I just have an opinion, because, like, this show started with me and my friends drinking alcohol and talking about conspiracy theories. I have a scotch and tonic right now. Like, what do you think about alcohol and this idea? Like, my wife is away. It's the last time she's gonna be away before we have the kids. So I'm having indulging a little bit, right? I'm gonna have a cigar later or whatever. But what do you think about, like, this idea that it connects with the spirit realm? Because I was a weird kid. I played Ouija board very young. Grew up very fast, like having sex young, drinking young, smoking weed young. Do you think there is a connection between alcohol and the spirit realm, that people are able to access it? Because I felt when I was younger and I would drink, and I actually very stupidly would use the Ouija board when I was under the influence by myself. And I have an aunt.
Not a good idea.
Yeah, exactly. I have an aunt from Jamaica, and she used to play it in Jamaica and be like, "Yeah, never do this by yourself." And when I was 16, I was like, you know what? I'm not scared. I'm not. And I felt that I cursed myself in some sort of way because of it. I had like just bad karma and stuff like that when I was younger to some extent. And it felt like something attached to me that was using my energy. At least that's what I perceived it as, because I did a lot of stupid things when I was younger. But do you think that there is some sort of connection, why they called it spirits? You think about, like, even if you like to get into some of the stuff like this idea of the Hellfire Club and some of those, like, where they were doing these weird rituals, drinking, having sex, like, to invoke these things.
So there's a couple of different things here that we could look at. First of all, if we're talking about drinking or sex or drugs, or maybe what we could term Crowleyanism, because
Yes, I
Aleister
want to get
Crowley
into
was
that.
famous for these things. This would, by some definition, probably be considered black magic, or it would be considered wicked. But the reason that people do those kinds of things, whether they're fully aware of it or not, and Crowley certainly was, is because the whole goal is to get outside of the physical space. So people drink, people do drugs, people smoke, people have sex, specifically ritualistically as well. But people drink just to, forget about their day, to relax, or whatever people say that it does for them. But when you ritualize it, it has a much more stated intended effect, right? So when you do those kinds of things, the goal is to get outside of the body. It's kind of a cheap and easy way if we're talking about
It's
magic.
true. Yeah.
It's a cheap and easy way of doing something that you could otherwise achieve through meditation and through, I guess you could even call it proper, by some relative definition, diet. But
Mhm.
if you focus each day of your life on making sure that you make decisions that are good for the body and the mind, you can eventually reach that state. But some people want to reach that state without much work, so they do those things ritualistically in order to
100%.
attain
That's what
that.
mushrooms is like, right? Like, same idea.
Yes, which it's funny, people have told me to, because this mushroom thing keeps coming up when we speak. The mushroom subject is funny because people will tell me, "You gotta do mushrooms, you gotta do mushrooms, you gotta do mushrooms." And then I tell them, or I ask them why, and they say, "Well, because you'll see these things, you'll experience these things." I said, "But I've already experienced those things. I didn't do
Mhm.
mushrooms to experience them." "Well, how did you experience without mushrooms?" Well, there are other ways to, as I'm explaining, there's other ways to connect with that world, whether it's meditation or some other type of spiritual practice
Is
that's
that why
not
you're
so
so interested
on
in
itself.
Japan? Is
Part of the
that part?
reason we could talk about Shinto on tonight's show. I think Shinto is a
Yeah.
really pure form of all of this. Yeah, we could talk about that, but let me
Yeah,
explain
yeah,
the
yeah.
alcohol thing really quick. The other
Yeah,
side
yeah,
of
yeah.
it. The other side of it is to the question of spirits. Yes, alcohol is referred still today as spirits. The reason for that might not be what people think, but the reason for that historically, in the same way that Dionysus or Bacchus, the gods of wine in Rome and Greece, the reason that their stories are so frantic or fanatical, or let's just say kind of crazy, was because those gods were the embodiment of alcohol, the embodiment of the transformation of the substance into one substance into another
Interesting, yeah.
substance. So when those characters were possessing you, it wasn't an actual spirit, but it was the idea of what Bacchus or Dionysus represents
Mhm.
that was possessing you. And what they represent is the transformation of let's say, a grain into alcohol through a distillation process. In other words, it's basically an ancient description. It's an ancient description of the scientific process of distilling alcohol and creating alcohol. They probably understood it, the people that were doing it, a lot more than we might think. Maybe the average person didn't understand it, so it became more of oh, they're actually spirits. They're actually spirits. So there's probably two sides to that. But the idea of spirits and alcohol, it comes from the idea that, yes, we have transitioned one substance into another. It makes people act differently. And so the spirit of that particular thing is
I
inside of this
I've
person.
seen people that are the nicest. Like, I'm actually a pretty nice and fun drunk, but, like, I've seen people that are the nicest people in the world drink alcohol, and they turn into, like, raging maniacs. Like, it's crazy to see, like, the switch that turns on in their head, and certain alcohol may do this to other people, but I I've seen people, like, under the influence where almost like it's like they're under the influence of a demonic presence. I've watched it happen. People that I know close to me that have, like, drank too much. Um, there's a famous story the fans will know. I've seen shadow people and stuff like this, and this was after an event in Cuba where I went, and one of my good friends, that was my cousin's cousin, but I was good friends. He got drunk out of his mind before we left on the plane. He's like, "Oh, this is a good idea. I'm gonna sleep through it or whatever." And he got wasted, and then he's like chewing his own toenails in the middle of a Cuban airport, like the craziest stuff you could imagine. No shirt, no shoes, just a pajama pants, and he like it didn't even look like him. His eyes, everything. It was like he was gone. And it's like something takes hold of people.
Yeah, so that's why historically and today we would still refer to that as a kind of a form of possession. Someone is possessed
Mhm.
by their alcoholism. In the old world, people might say they were possessed by Dionysus or possessed by Bacchus.
Interesting.
They're,
Yeah.
they're possessed by the spirit of this thing. So in alcohol and in a story like that and in other stories that are similar, it's very similar to when someone is sick. Historically, if we go back into the ancient world, when someone was sick, they acted differently. Maybe they were sweating more, they had a fever, maybe they were they could be vomiting, whatever the case might be, whatever kind of sickness they have, the body's trying to get rid of some poison, or
Mhm.
they've eaten something that's bad, or whatever the case is. The individual would be said to have a spirit that possesses them, in the same way that if someone got drunk and they started acting differently.
And they
So
would
this is
do exorcisms, right? In some places, they would do some sort of ritual to like get the sickness out of them, right? Because they believe they were
precisely.
possessed, right?
Yes, and although Roman Catholics and Westerners like to think that they have, and the Catholic Church specifically thinks that they created the exorcism. Well, maybe they've created the prescribed order of the traditional Roman Latin exorcist rite, but the idea of an exorcism is universal. In fact, over here in Japan, they had exorcisms too. When someone was possessed, they would take a sword and they would cut the air above the head of the individual to sever the connection between the demonic spirit. It might not be
Weird.
a,
That's
a
cool.
Latin rite, but
Yeah.
it's an exorcism. But the point being that you're possessed by something. It could be alcohol, it could be a disease that's making you act differently. So in the old world, for example, and we do the same thing today, you would have your, I guess we do the same kinds of exorcisms today too, but you would have your little vial of holy water, you'd have your cross, you'd have your Latin text that you would read, etc. You'd have a Bible. Well, we do the same thing today. You have to know the name of the demon, and then they would cast it out.
Oh yeah, yeah,
We do the same thing with sickness today, right? We have a little vial, we call it a vaccine. We have a
yeah.
syringe that looks like a cross, and we have our medical lab coats instead of a robe for a ritual, and we know the name of the disease, whatever it is, we cast it out with the vaccine. The
I do
idea of
believe that that's what they're doing though, because a lot of people have
well,
suffered greatly.
I think it's this. Well, no, I think what it is it's looking at it from an objective point of view. When we look at the historical idea of an exorcism and what we see in movies, it's obviously an exaggeration. And then what we do today, we consider to be the height of science. But in 100 or 200 years, we'll look back and think that that practice is just as barbaric as maybe what our ancestors were doing. And I think we misunderstand the context historically, presently, and probably in the future as well. Exorcisms are also, if you look at the word exercise, to exorcise a demon, it comes from the same root as to exercise, as in to go for a jog or to lift weights, because you're trying to exercise your demons and keep yourself healthy. And that's what exorcisms originally were for. They were to exorcise the disease out of the person to keep them healthy. That's why exercise and exercise, or exorcist, you exercise, has the same word, has the same root meaning to the word,
I
because you're
actually heard
trying
that
to.
once in a hip hop song, and I was like, it's interesting
Oh,
because
did you?
exercising the demon, right? And I was like,
Yes.
it's some line about running on a treadmill or something. They're exercising their demons, and I was like,
It
interesting.
has the same it has the same root meaning. Yeah, it has the, and then if you go back to alcohol, you have gin. Gin's a very popular old alcohol, and what is the gin? Well, these are the smokeless demons, or the monsters or creatures or demonic angel-like things
Yeah.
in the Arabic world. In the Muslim mythology, they're a lower ranking intelligence in the hierarchy of demons and angels, and that's gin. And then, if of course you do, there's an Arabic word for alcohol. In fact, it's part of where the word that we know in English comes from. It's both French and Latin, but also Arabic, and the Arabic word is al-kul. It means the coal, which has something to do with
Does
I think it's like a black powder substance. It has
does it
something to
mean
do with.
soul eating demon or something? Like the original
No,
word for
see,
alcohol? 'Cause
that's
I've
what they
heard that.
claim. That's
Yeah,
what they claim. And this is actually my a personal problem that I have, and it goes back to something when we were talking about what to do on the show tonight.
yeah.
I was all the things you were bringing up, I'm thinking I'm all interested in that, but there's a lot of this stuff that people will just post online, and it becomes a trending thing, and it's
Yeah, I
not true.
saw that, and I looked into it, I didn't see anything of what they were claiming, and I was like, "This is weird."
No, the word alcohol is derived from French. It's derived from medieval Latin, and it is derived from the Arabic alcohol, AL-KUHL,
Mm.
or the kohl, KOHL. It refers to powders and substances, particularly those that are obtained through sublimation, things that are distilled, and that's like the etymological origin of the word, but it does not mean what people say that it means. So when you see those kinds of things, they're half right and they're half wrong, whether that's intentional or it's just ignorance or whatever the case is. That's kind of I guess as a separate subject, but that's kind of a personal problem that I have with a lot of this stuff is that, yeah, that's true. There's gin and there's alcohol and there's spirits, but where does all of this come from? And when we hear about this stuff in the modern, I guess you could say, spiritual or occult kind of literature, how much of it's actually accurate? We got to kind of go back to the source. It's really important.
Yeah, and just because it came up on my just thought about it, like what do you think about Aleister Crowley and like the Hellfire Club? Like, what do you think they were trying to achieve? Like, they're two separate things, but like it's in the same realm of doing, like, I would say, kind of perverted, sick, ritualistic magic to invoke something out of, like, we talked about the Boleskine house recently, and like when he was doing all these rituals and didn't close the portal, and maybe that's where the Loch Ness monster came from, and stuff like that. I just like to kind of know your thoughts about, like, because we haven't covered the Hellfire Club, thing I've always wanted to do, but I'm aware of kind of the practices and things that went on there, and I'd like to get your thoughts on Crowley also.
Yeah, there were a couple different Hellfire clubs. There was one in London. Actually, I think there were a couple in London. There was one in Ireland, and these were
Yeah,
the
yeah.
official historical Hellfire clubs. They basically were, let's call them elite parties. They were eyes wide shut type parties. They were for elites or for wealthy people to go and to do things that otherwise were considered a little bit immoral, right? So that could include excessive drinking, that could include drug use, that could include orgies and things like this. It's to think about it in the simplest terms, it's basically eyes wide shut.
Yeah.
Now, they might not be doing satanic rituals or something to that effect, but it's basically eyes wide shut. It's a ditty party.
Yeah,
It's
of
essentially what it
course.
is. It was the older version of a ditty party, basically. I don't know if they had pink cocaine and baby oil, but it was something to that effect. If we're looking at like the OTO, I think only has a relationship to something like that because the OTO was, with Crowley being who he was promoting the same types of things. I don't think, from what I understand, that the Hellfire Club was intending to do the same things that Crowley and his Crowleyites were attempting to do. Crowley had attempted on more than one occasion, and of course, he does have a connection to that house that you mentioned. Had attempted to open portals or gateways, had attempted to contact the other side, let's call it, had summoned Lamb. Lamb looks LAM. Lamb looks like a
A
gray
gray alien.
extraterrestrial.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, from the other side. But then again, it's like going back to the mushrooms and going back to the
Do
ayahuasca
you
and going
think
back
he
to
did it?
DMT. Well, that's what I'm saying. Going back to the mushrooms and the DMT and ayahuasca and things like that, that is the type of thing that you see when you're on certain
Mm,
substances. And or if that's your intention, you can work yourself up into a frenzy. So that is what you see. It doesn't mean he actually opened a portal. And people like Crowley was working with British intelligence. He was an intelligence asset. In fact, a lot of people Crowley might be a different example of this, but a lot of people we don't think much about, like, for example, Houdini. Houdini was an asset of the intelligence community. He worked with the US government, and I think he worked with the British intelligence agencies as well because you heard that before too?
no, I actually haven't heard that. It was just, you'll probably find this amusing, but when me and my friends used to use the Ouija board when we were like 12, because I got obsessed with it, probably wasn't a good thing. But Harold Houdini, we supposedly, I don't believe it was him, but we supposedly contacted Harold Houdini. He would tell us jokes and stuff, like stuff that I'll never forget because it was just so strange and bizarre. Like, we were all emo and into metal and stuff like that, and one of the jokes was like, "How did the punk cross the road?" he was stapled or pinned to the chicken, something like that, along those lines. And it was something that me and my friends would never have thought of. But for some reason, the Ouija board like gave these like very specific things to us. And there's even my friends, we're dumb 12-year-olds. No way we could have spelled out the things that it was doing at that fast. Maybe our subconscious, I will always put that out there. But we called Harold Houdini because it was a famous person that we knew of. And it moved as I could feel it. It was really weird. And whoever that was told us jokes. But I could figure that Harold Houdini had some connections. I feel like a lot of these people end up having connections to like certain 3-letter agencies and stuff like that, right?
Even certain religions. Houdini was a Jewish intelligence asset in the same way Epstein was. Actually, Ron Jeremy, the porn star, his mother was intelligence, and it's very likely that he likewise was. And he's also
that guy is so creepy, man.
He's also Jewish, for the record. It's very weird to see. And so is Jack the Ripper, and so is Christopher Columbus. He's Ashkenazi Jew. It's really weird when you learn about these different characters throughout history, all their intelligence or specifically religious connections that they have, or tribal religious connections they have.
I want you to tell me more about that because like people are so fascinated about that stuff. Of course, Ron Jeremy's Jewish. He kind of looks like a Jewish goblin, a fat Jewish goblin, but like that guy is creepy as fuck.
I didn't say it. You said it.
Yeah, it's so he looks like, especially now, and like as he ate, oh man, they just look. And it's funny because if you put him and probably Harvey Weinstein together, they look like they're brothers or some shit. You know what I mean? They look very similar.
Rabbi Shmuley could be put into that category as well. Well,
People
they look
are
that
fascinated
way
by this stuff of like why it is all connected back to Jewish people, their religion, Zionism, all that stuff. Because I've looked into that and it's weird because once you start to notice, that's the noticing, it's like it's really weird.
I don't think that I mean, you might have just meant that in a figure of speech way, but I don't think it's all connected to that.
Yeah.
But there is a very powerful Jewish mafia, without doubt.
Yeah.
And part of that is, I explained this on a recent show that I did as a guest on another radio show, and I've explained it on my show over and over again. The Jewish community, historically, which is also where we get the term zealot from, they were a very tight-knit community, and they didn't allow others into their community. And they have a tribal god, and their god protects them and them only. And anybody that attempted to infiltrate their community, or anybody, not that anybody necessarily was trying to, but anybody who would have attempted to do that would have faced the death penalty. In fact, if you read the
Noahide laws,
more so, well, not necessarily, just more so because it was a closed off community that, like any other, the Jewish community wasn't unique. I mean, there's lots of communities that are very closed off, and they're basically cults that if you get too close to them, you might suffer the consequences. And those consequences are actually written down, not in the Noahide laws, but in Sanhedrin 59a of the William Davidson Talmud. Rabbi Yohanan says that, this is a quote, this isn't my opinion or a paraphrase, a Gentile who engages in Torah study, which is the first couple books of the Bible, is liable to receive the death penalty. Because as it is stated in Deuteronomy 33:4, this book, or the series of books, was given as an inheritance for us, the Jews, and not for them. So people that study the Torah are actually condemned to death by the Jewish High Council.
For just reading words.
For reading it, for studying it, maybe not possessing it, but you could assume that if reading it or studying it, you would be condemned to death. You're probably possessing it as well. And it's the same Jewish High Council that was responsible, not exclusively, but in large part, for the death of Jesus in the story, this is an avalanche.
Yeah, what do you think about this?
Here.
What do you think about Jesus? Because I've always questioned the existence of Jesus, and it wasn't just stories that were told, and like, because there's like connections to there's Mithra and Krishna and even some of the ancient Egyptian gods like Horus that like share similar stories. So I was just curious of what you thought about that. And I would definitely love to get more of your thoughts of like, why do you think there's this centralized power of specifically Jewish people? Because it's clear anyone that looks around can see it.
There are centralized powers of other groups as well. But okay, so there's a lot to unpack here. We've triggered an avalanche.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
so let's look at the Jewish community historically as a tight-knit, cult-like tribal society. That's not unique, and those terms are not meant to demean Jews. It's just that's a factual thing, in the same way that the whole nation of Japan was, for the most part, a closed-off, tight-knit, cult-like society where anybody from the outside, for the most part, was seen as an outsider, just like in China or any other empire or any other part of the
Except for
world.
white countries.
Maybe except for, but even historically, I mean,
Yeah.
Germanic tribes were very tight knit as
Used
well.
to
So
be.
not anymore. But
Yeah.
yes, the Jewish community was very much that, in the same way others were as well. So it's not unique to Jews. The Jewish community, or the Jewish cult, or the Jewish religion, or whatever you choose to call it, because there's so many denominations of it, just like Christianity, they offered atonement for sins only to their own people. When the Christians started to develop out of Judaism, the Christians believed that you could obtain atonement through the blood of Jesus. So you no longer had to kill animals. You no longer had to even sacrifice children, which the Jews were accused of over and over again
Over and
historically,
over.
and did in fact worship, whether it's the golden calf, or it's the bull Moloch, or Rimpham, which is where the star comes from, which
Yep.
is, it says this in the book of Acts, and also there's a relationship that has to the book of Revelation, where they are considered the synagogue of Satan. They've turned their back on God. So the Christians come along and say, look, we don't have to burn animals, and we don't have to sacrifice animals and children and pour their blood out. Now Jesus, his blood was the ultimate atonement. And if you would like to be a Christian, we would love to have you. You're not going to be forced, and we're not going to prevent you from coming into our group. We want everybody to join by choice. The problem with that was, historically, at the foundation of the church, or even before there was a church, whatever that initially was, when you have the original, missionaries, or the original followers of Christ, they very quickly found out that by allowing anybody into the group, particularly people to come in and to have their sins absolved, well, that created a problem, because it attracted all of the really bad people in society. It attracted the criminals.
Interesting.
It attracted the murderers, the thieves. And so the church very quickly found itself, and we're not talking about an institution per se, we're talking about just a concept, found itself very corrupted by evil people who could just obtain the forgiveness of their sins through a quick little ritual, and then go and continue to steal and to rape and to murder.
But
Some
do you
people,
think, what is to do with the, just to butt in, sorry, but like the idea of like the Jewish rituals of, what's the one, they like project their sins into a chicken and they kill it because
Azazel,
because they do
scapegoat.
these rituals that it's like, oh, my sins are all gone, I can do whatever I want, I can, go to Epstein's Island or Mossad's Island and do whatever the hell I want, and then if I kill this chicken and put all my sins into it, weren't they doing similar stuff even by like the human sacrifice and stuff, like, oh, if I just do this, I'll appease the God that is only watching out for our people or whatever.
Yeah, well, it was a much more extreme. Any kind of tribal version of this is going to be very extreme. So in the Jewish sect, you have an extreme version of this, and this is where the demon Azazel comes from. Azazel is the goat. So the scapegoat, they would put the sins into the goat, and then drive the goat into the woods, or drive it over a cliff, or just kill it. And that would be the way that all their sins would be forgiven. Of course, the Christians came along and said, you don't have to kill those animals anymore. Jesus died for you. And then that created a schism, and
You know where that came from?
the scapegoat.
No, this idea of killing animals to appease like whatever, to atone for your sins.
Well, there's a lot of different ways that you could look at that. So and we're going to try to tie all of this together, all these questions and all these ideas before the end of the show.
Yeah, I'm just like, it fascinates me because these are thoughts I've had for like my whole life about why these things are going on and what's happening.
I don't know how true this is, what I'm about to say. I know that there's definitely a mythological character in China called Shangdi. And Shangdi, or otherwise known as the Jade Emperor, has a very similar story to Yahweh. and Shangdi in China. We're talking about vastly different parts of the world now.
I've
To
heard
answer
about
your
this, I think.
question.
Yeah.
You have?
Yeah, I
So
think so. Yeah.
it's a pretty unknown story, but the
Hmm.
story of Shangdi is similar in some respects to Yahweh, and Shangdi wants animals to be sacrificed to him, just like Yahweh. And these sacrifices of animal, whether they're burnt offerings or blood offerings, are meant to appease the god and are also meant to wash away your sins. Now you're asking why? Well, if you read the Bible, and it's not just the Bible, there are other texts as well. But if you read the Bible, especially in Leviticus, the Bible talks about how the blood is the life force of the animal. So if you are bathing in the blood of an animal or bathing in the life force of another animal, animals for all intents and purposes are considered pure. They don't have conscious thought, and they don't commit sins like humans do. So if you're bathing in the blood of
Like
an
Elizabeth
animal that hasn't
Bathory.
committed a sin, then you're obtaining the purity of that although some animals are unclean, of course, but the life force. And yes, it is like Elizabeth Bathory in a sense, where she bathes in the blood of the young women to reverse the aging process.
Weird.
So if you have Christians coming along and saying you don't have to do that anymore, Jesus did that, that obviously created a problem. But then the Christians, to wrap this story up and put a bow on it, the Christians started to do what the Jews did, except instead of the Jews having said, you can't be part of our group and everybody else is subject to us, we consider you animals, we consider you slaves, we consider you to be
Goyim.
inferior to us, goyim. The Christians said that they basically the Christians did something very similar, except the Christians said, okay, look, if you don't become a Christian, now you're going to die. So instead of you can't become a Jew, we don't want you, you're goyim. The Christians originally said you can become a Christian. They welcomed a bunch of really bad people in. Maybe that helps some bad people in the long run. But then the Christians started to say, well, if you don't join us, then we're going to have to kill you. I mean, this is a very superficial overview of history.
Yeah, for sure.
But there's an important point here, because the Christians, if you read Edward Gibbon, the main authority on Roman history, he describes that the Christians in Rome in those early days were the ones demanding to be burned or to be killed in some manner for their belief. And the Roman governors or magistrates of the provinces were simply trying to keep the peace, keep the religious peaceful order, which was Rome, or at least the idea of Rome was that all religions lived in peace. So, for example, I'll give you an example, and this is going to answer, I think, ultimately answer these questions that we're asking and we're talking about. Augustus, the Golden Age emperor who's essentially saved Rome, he told the Jews, he said, look, we're going to sacrifice something to your God. All we're asking you to do is sacrifice something to our God. You don't have to believe it. You don't have to think that it's real. It's just a visible gesture to the people to show that we're all trying to live in religious harmony. So Augustus reportedly sacrifices something to the Jewish God, and the Jews spit in his face and said, F you. That's probably not a good idea to do that to the emperor. So that was one of the reasons that the Romans had a problem with the Jews, mixed with the fact that, as I said, the word zealot comes from early Judaism combating the Romans and trying to overthrow Roman rule. And I understand the Romans occupied this territory and the Roman Empire was vast. What I'm getting at here is that the Roman Empire was largely accepting of religions. There's a reason that the Jews were persecuted, because they created their own persecution, whether it's justified or not. And there was a reason the Christians were persecuted, whether they created it or not, whether it's justified
Seems
or
like
not.
both of them did it.
The Jews and the Christians both spit in the face of the generally accepted Roman authority, which was peace of religions. We want there to be an acceptance of all religions. And at the core of this, today you might say as a Christian, well, we were persecuted and that's wrong and the Romans were evil, et cetera, et cetera. But you have to understand the context of the times. We're talking about a vast portion of the world falling under this one authority. so big it was broken into two empires, the Western and Eastern Empire. But this vast empire, whether people actually believe these things or not, with all of these different religions, were largely based on the same ideas. We call them pagan. That's not the right term, but these quote pagan religions, these were the religions of your ancestors. These were your ancestors. This was your community. This was your father, your mother, your grandma, your grandpa who had died. These were the people that came before you that built the society you lived in. And to the Romans who believed those things, and to the various provinces that the Roman Empire controlled, to say that all of that is irrelevant, and to say that all of that is stupid and satanic and demonic and evil and wicked, was spitting in the face of generation after generation after generation of people that had built the world that they lived in. It was spitting in the face of somebody and saying, your ancestors don't matter. They're evil. You have to worship what we say.
That's
So
what's happening
obviously,
in the world now, though. It seems like in Canada and stuff like that, all the things that my family's been in Canada since 1604. They're telling, oh, you're just evil white colonizers and all the shit that they kind of spew. I feel like it's somehow the same thing of them disparaging us as a people for the things that we accomplished from pretty much nothing, right? And then they do this time and time again. History
this is
repeats.
this is a relatively common historical thing, right? It's not
Yeah.
just something that applies to Christians or Jews or anything else. But my point is, back to your question,
Mm.
that's one of the reasons why Jews and Christians were persecuted. And then we have to understand, and I learned this from a rabbi, that the Jewish community was, like most Christians and Muslims, they were controlled by a kind of religious code, which is what the Sanhedrin is, right? The Christians have their religious
Yeah.
code, and the Muslims have their religious code, and there's different sects of that. But the Muslims were forbidden from it, and still are forbidden, if you read the Quran, engaging in usury. The Christians are forbidden from engaging in usury.
But they do.
Jews are not. Well,
Yeah.
they do, but they're forbidden. Their religion forbids them. Christians might not know that, but usury is forbidden. Now, for Jews, it's not. So Jews can loan money to
Yep.
Gentiles at interest. They cannot do that to other Jews. And then, of course, Muslims and Christians, especially Christians, were really, maybe more so culturally than legally, were not forbidden, but kind of prevented from going into the entertainment industry, because it was seen as just kind of a sleazy profession, right?
I got Jews owning Pornhub and owning Hollywood and every other thing, like, all the dating apps and
That's right. So that's why Jews became these kinds of people. They became bankers.
well,
They
they seem
became
like they're sneaky and is it
entertainers.
not evil? Is it not is that on the face value of what they're doing to society to like the control mechanisms that they do have to manipulate society at such a large scale? Is that not evil? In their eyes, it's not, but is it not like getting people to consume and be consumers while they own everything and control everything, and like the Rothschild dynasty and all the other connections to them as a people, and everyone's starting to notice now, so I'm just like, and then I'll ask that question, then I'll ask, like, where do the Muslims fit in all this stuff, because they are not really very good at assimilating and doing anything outside of the realm of the brainwashing that they've been conditioned. Because I think, as far as I've read, Muhammad just picked a law out of an ancient scripture and then just like, oh, this is my God now, and manipulated a lot of people to believe in pretty much nothing but blatant lies and hypocrisy, and I see this now in the UK, in places where I know people and I've talked to people, and one of my best friends lives in Ireland. I do the show with, like, you see these people come in and they don't adapt. Their culture is so different. They live in like a barbaric stone age, in my opinion, of what they do to people and women, and where do they all fit in this? Because they believe in all, like, essentially killing people and the infidels and all that stuff to get what they want, when their religion was just manufactured and constructed, most like other religions.
Well, the goal of religion is to have an inner reflection of the self, and to
But I don't
adapt
see that
and
in
to
Muslims. I've talked to
change.
Muslims and it doesn't seem that way.
Well, okay, so we have to understand that the base of these things is obviously different than how people have been raised to interpret them. So, for example, if you read the book of Romans, this is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. Context matters, of course. You can go dig up all the context to it, but this is what the book of Romans says, Romans 2:28 through 29. And this will answer your question about Islam as well. It says, a person is not a Jew who is one outwardly, or who is only one outwardly, nor is circumcision merely outward and physical. No, a person is a Jew who is one inwardly, and circumcision is circumcision of the heart by the Spirit, not by the written code. Such a person's praise is not from other people, but from God. In other words, to be a Jew has nothing to do with who you're born to. It has nothing to do with a receding hairline and a yarmulke on your head and some weird curls and this proclivity to control the porn industry. That's not what a Jew is. A Jew is someone who is a Jew inwardly. It's a spiritual practice. In the same way that you don't have to be part of a lodge to be a Mason. You can be a Freemason and not be part of a lodge. You can be a Jew and not be Jewish. I mean, frankly, I'm Jewish. You might even be Jewish by these definitions. Circumcision, likewise, is not a physical thing to be done. In the same way that a jihad, a religious holy war, is not like an actual crusade against physical human beings like who exist in this realm that we have to kill because they're different than us. The jihad is the holy or spiritual war that takes place inside of us. It's the angel and the demon on the shoulders. It's the arguments and we have in our own head between what is right and what is wrong. And the decapitation of that infidel is not cutting off the head of someone who disagrees with us. It means you're cutting off the head of the carnal self in the same way that as Jews, we circumcise as part of our covenant with God. The circumcision is a spiritual circumcision. It happens internally. It's a circumcision like the decapitation of the infidel, a circumcision of the carnal self, a circumcision of the animal self. It is the true animal sacrifice, which means that you don't actually have to kill animals. You don't actually have to chop a little baby's penis into pieces and then suck the blood out of it like rabbis do.
Yeah,
You don't have to decapitate somebody and watch their head roll down the hill. What all of these things mean, spiritual versus the carnal physical self, the animal versus the spirit self. The animal is a representation of our impulses. If you can control control your impulses like Solomon can control the demons, that's all that it is. They're not real demons. We fight our own demons. We exercise our demons like we talked about earlier. Solomon has control of these demons, and then he can build the temple. The temple is the self. The Bible says this over and over again. And we go inwardly to the temple. That's where we go pray. That's meditation.
But you think Solomon was evil? A lot of people.
No, I think Solomon was is a metaphoric story for the most part. And I think that's what the demons are. It's metaphoric.
So you think that all this stuff is just an outward these carnal sins, so to speak, because like it's to me, I do think it's really sad to see what's going on in the UK and stuff like that, and how Muslims are so consumed by their religion that they don't even benefit to society. And that's my point of view. In any way that I've seen, unless there's different versions of all religions and Muslims and Christians and Jews and all that stuff, right? But from what I've seen, from people that I've talked to in the UK, from the videos I've seen, they're just there to like impose their dominance of their religion onto people. And I didn't see this conversation going this way at all, actually, which I'm definitely have to get you back on the show for another episode because I want to get more in the magic stuff at some point. But like, this is just interesting because of the stuff that I've seen going on physically that is happening, where people are acting like barbarians and animals and acting like animals, like raping kids and women and young girls, the Muslim, like they want to call them grooming gangs, but they're rape gangs, all that type of stuff, like them saying it's okay to marry a 9-year-old, like in their religion, that's okay because they've said, oh, well, God told me it's fine. Right. So like, where's your standpoint on all that stuff? Because I think it's kind of sick and animalistic when they act like savages and animals, and then they wonder why people view them that way. I'm not saying it's all Muslims, and I'm not saying all Jewish people are Christian or anyone. Yeah.
No, I understand. Well, again, these are complex issues. So we have to go and build a base foundation before we can really answer those questions. I think a lot of the problem, I'm going to answer that question, but I think a lot of the
Yeah.
problem when these discussions are had is that people, one, go on social media and they see little clips of things that are taken out of context, both in terms of time and in terms of what's actually being done or what's actually being said. And I think people, because they have, especially in the West, we have a very Christian perspective, Christian conservative perspective. Not that there's something wrong with that, but you have a very Christian conservative perspective. And most Christians don't even have much of, I don't think, an understanding of their own religion. They certainly don't have an understanding of the Islamic religion or the Muslim world. So I think a lot of it is based on ignorance. Now, when I say ignorance, I just mean we just don't know. It's not a
I
bad
will
thing
say I did
necessarily.
read the Quran when I was 16. It did bore me. But I knew I was there's hip hop artists I liked that at the time that were Muslim, even though they're white, and I read it and it was just boring and I don't remember much about it, but I rented it from a library and I still don't think that it's a great religion in my opinion.
Well, I'm glad that you actually read it because most people don't read it. In fact, I'm sure there's just as many Muslims that never read the Quran as there are Christians that never read the Bible.
Yes, true, man. So
But
true.
let's try to unpack some of these things that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought this up. We can actually tie this into magic if you'd like, if we have enough time here. So
Yeah.
let's do this. So if to answer your question, when I describe the book of Romans as talking about a Jew is a person who is a Jew not outwardly but internally, and circumcision is not something you perform physically, it's something you perform spiritually. And I said the same thing can be applied to the jihad, and the same thing can be applied to the decapitation of the infidel. And the same thing can even be applied in terms of there being an underlying symbolic meaning to the idea that the Jews are the chosen people. If Jews are people that are Jews inwardly and spiritually and not Jews outwardly, that means all people, you, myself, our audience, we're all God's chosen people. We're all
Yeah, I
created
agree with
in the
that.
image of God, right? So it's not, the Jews don't have control of that ultimately. They're not the chosen people that God picked to rule the earth. That's psychotic. And
Yeah,
people that
I agree.
interpret it that way, yes, people that interpret it that way, including Christians, are psychotic. I think that's the definition of deranged
The
and
Christian
delusional.
Zionists have lost their mind in a lot of regards. So
Those kinds of ideas are antithetical to what the true meaning of what they're based on. All of us are God's chosen people. Likewise, the Holy Land. The Holy Land is not some physical geographical location. The Holy Land is inside of you internally. That's the Holy Land. Your body is the temple. Your body is the Holy Land. The circumcision is of the heart of the soul, right? The decapitation of the carnal self. The jihad is the holy war of good versus evil. Now, in understanding that, obviously, people hear this and they say, well, that's not Islam. That's not Christianity. That's not Judaism. These people do whatever your perception is, whatever your religion is. These people do bad things. The Jews do this. The Muslims do this. You're right. They do. But that's not the point. The point is, at the foundation, at the core, that's what these things are supposed to be. That's how we're supposed to interpret them. That's the original meaning. Are they taken out of context and distorted? Absolutely.
yes, for
And then
sure.
you got to look at how that's been done. Well, you have plenty of Jews who have been corrupted by I call them rabid rabbis, by the rabid rabbis who do believe in the self-importance and being chosen and that everybody else is their servant and slave. In the same way that when the Western Roman Empire was about to fall and adopts Christianity, which we now see with the selection of yet another new pope, that's
Yeah.
that's the Roman Empire in existence today. And the church was, and Catholicism means universal religion. So that is an extension of an imperial man-made authority that has usurped the authority of God. I think that based on biblical teachings, the Pope himself is the Antichrist in spirit. It is the elevation of a man to the position of or above the position of God.
That's what I was gonna say of this idea of like, well, I'm the spokesperson for God. Even in the Sabbatean Francis cult, where they like were like, well, this guy speaks. he's the voice for God. He echoes what God speaks. That could just be some narcissistic Kanye West guy that's like, oh, like I'm talking to God. And it's like, are you though? And that's what's so weird to me about like these, like, I'm God's chosen people. Are you though? And why are you chosen? And you could, and then people that believe it and then they get involved, it's just like a cult. And it's just like Waco, and you have like David Koresh. It's like where he's a God's chosen person to speak to these people, and I'm the voice of God, right? And it's crazy that like, and then people buy into that stuff. Same with L. Ron Hubbard. If you think of any cult, Charles Manson, they give him acid, and then they're like, all right, I control your perception of reality, right? So it's interesting.
Crowley,
Yeah, like Crowley.
Crowleyites are like that today. Crowleyites, the people that are into sex magic and that are with having, I mean, I would say that most of them have no context for what any of that stuff is or where it comes from or what it does. This applies to everything. And so I mentioned Jews, I mentioned Christians. The same thing applies to Islam. I mean, at the core, trying to understand what the Quran says or what the Muslims believe is like trying to understand what the Christians believe. First of all, which denomination are you talking about? Second of all, what reference in the Quran or what reference in some religious code of the Muslims are we referring to when we say things like, well, like you said, well, they believe in marrying a 9-year-old girl. It's funny because the context of that is really important. Did Muhammad marry a 9-year-old girl? Probably.
Yeah, he probably did.
Probably did.
I heard that she was 6, and then
That's true. 6,
yeah,
and then 9 later. Now, what's the context of that? Because in the Talmud, it says the same thing, though. In fact, in the Talmud, it's even worse. It's a 3-year-old, right? But what's the context of that? To defend the Jews and to defend the Muslims, just for a moment, I think that there's a necessity here in at least looking at the other side of this. I'm not saying I'm defending what we consider pedophilia, but when you look at the old grimoires, what do the grimoires say about certain types of sacrifices? They say you have to sacrifice a kid,
a virgin.
We interpret that as a child. But if you go to a dictionary, a kid means a goat.
Interesting.
So you're not killing a child. Now, again,
so you think their interpretations are just wrong? Like, and they're like, we got to kill this kid.
In large part, I don't. Okay, this is a very tricky thing. Okay, it's a balancing act. I'm not saying that's what the Talmud actually says. I'm not saying that's what the story
because they say
of
you
Muhammad,
can rape a girl up till age of 3 because the hymen's not broken and shit. Like,
yeah, or it grows back, or you can. I think they say it's like putting your finger into her eye, something to that effect. But the Talmud also says that you can have sex with a 9-year-old. So my problem with this is it's a balancing act here.
Yeah.
People might get upset with you and say, well, you just had this guy who's defending Islam and defending Judaism and defending pedophilia. I'm not defending pedophilia. What I'm saying is, if you read the grimoires talk about sacrificing a kid. That's not a child. That's not a little toddler. It's a goat. So is it possible that when we look at these things in these texts, that maybe even to the defense of the rabbis, maybe we're misinterpreting what they're saying? Maybe it's kind of so perverse when it was written to keep people, which is why the grimoires were so perverse. Most grimoires are like, you got to get the eye of this and the blood of that and the toenails of this, and you got to get the kid and cut the throat of the kid. And be like, oh my God, they're sacrificing children. No, they were written like that because they're written in code. It's meant to mean something else, like the sacrificing of the
but then
animal.
Do you think that they're actually doing it though? Like, well, they miss as a kid, and like they're like, you got.
No, not necessarily. I think people take these things and misunderstand. Misunderstand them. I think the point is we have to create like a foundation, and the foundation I think for understanding this is that there are references to things like children being killed that are not actually children being killed. We're talking about animals being killed.
What about all those times that they've said that there's like actual like written documentation that a child went missing and then was murdered, like throughout all these different centuries in Spain and all these different places that supposedly were like pointed back at the Jewish people?
Well, I'm sure that plenty of kids have been utilized for those kinds of practices. Children used to be buried in the foundation of buildings or walls to protect them.
That's crazy. I've never heard about that.
in some societies, this is reportedly the case. I
Well,
can't confirm that.
yeah,
It
yeah,
it could just be that maybe bones were found in the archaeological excavations of those places because people would die, like the Great Wall of China, and kind of
yeah.
be buried in the
Oh,
structure
yeah.
itself. But if you look at the history of things like that, I don't have any doubt that people sacrifice children. No doubt at all. In fact, I'm pretty sure it still happens today.
Yeah, me
However,
yeah, I'm convinced.
However, we have to understand that, like, when you have Christians writing histories of local communities in South America, like with the conquistadors, do you
Mhm.
think that they have an unbiased approach to talking about what they're seeing? Of course not, because there's no Jesus there. They're heathens, they're barbarians, and we
Yeah,
have to
yeah,
kill them and replace them. So there's clearly a motivation for Christian writers to exaggerate and to fabricate stories.
for sure.
And like we see with the Israeli state today, and historically going back to when they were founded, they love fabricating stories about children. In fact, you go back to the First World War, the Germans were accused of marching around. This isn't just Jews that accuse people of this. It's called atrocity propaganda. The Jews were, making up stories about lampshades that were made out of human skin and soap that were made out of Jewish
Wasn't
fat.
real.
Wasn't real, and neither were the stories of Germans World War One time period. Neither were the stories of Germans marching into battle with babies impaled on the end of their bayonets. There's
Did they
pictures.
actually say that they were doing that?
Yes, there's
Wow.
political cartoons of that. It's not true.
No.
So I'm just saying that I don't have any doubt that people haven't sacrificed children, physical sacrifices. But what does that mean in relation to the kid and the goat? And what does that mean in relation to the context of the people writing it who want to make their enemies look like the most barbaric
Yeah, and I've
people
heard
on
that.
earth,
Yeah, and
justify
you see
killing
that on both sides too. Like obviously the propaganda to do with Germany and the National Socialists and stuff like that that's taking place. It is interesting you phrase it that way because on all ends, every spectrum, that's why I'm not religious, because I think that it's all been more or less manufactured by something beyond our idea of what this reality is. That's my perspective. I think that something has been some outside force is manipulating us. That has always been my view. I feel like I've seen it, I felt it, but like how if it's someone is your enemy and you want them dead, that you will do whatever it takes to make sure that happens on all sides of the spectrum. And you see this with Palestine and them like Israel funded Hamas. There's a 100% paper trail and facts that they created Hamas to combat against Yasser Arafat and like did these things on purpose. And then they get into power and then they're like, oh, they're killing us. They're kidnapping people. And you could just manufacture whatever thing that you want, especially if you have power and money. You can just manufacture anything and then convince a population that that's what's happening when it could be literally nothing but just blatant lies. And then the lampshade thing is a great example of that. Of like, oh yeah, they're doing these horrible experiments. They're cutting off the twin's dick to see if the other one felt it, like stuff like that with Mengele. Which the more I've looked in this stuff, more I'm like, I don't even know any of that shit was taking
No.
place.
Most of it was fabricated in the same way that there were these stories about Jews. I think I mentioned this on the last show.
Yeah,
These Jewish stories about how Hitler had this deformed penis,
yeah,
when in
yeah.
when
It's
in
like,
reality it's Jeffrey Epstein that had the
yeah,
deformed penis, according to victims, and it was
people like that
Harvey
clip
Weinstein
that
that
went
had the deformed
viral a bit.
penis.
Yeah, yeah, it's so crazy.
But
So
these things are, I think, these are really important questions to ask, and it's important context to provide, because most of us just hear something and then
yeah,
we react to it, and we need to go to the source of a word or the source of a story. And I mean, it's actually kind of unfortunate because I had a conversation. I'll give you an example. I had a conversation with a guy who told me that he'd never heard any of this stuff before, and I said, well, it's kind of metaphoric. He said, what's a metaphor? I said, well, it's
weird.
like a symbolic representation of
Yeah.
some. You don't know what a metaphor is? I tried to explain it to him, and
That's so
I said, well,
weird. Like, do you live in the same world that I do?
yeah, yeah, it's like a figure of speech. He didn't
Yeah,
understand what it was, and that actually was kind of revelatory for me. I thought, oh well, if you don't understand what a metaphor is, or what an analogy is, or what, like, the point of a myth is, then obviously when you hear or see this stuff, you're going to have a literal interpretation of it. you're going to literally interpret that circumcision means cutting off part of the penis. You're going to literally interpret that infidels have to have their heads cut off, which takes us back to some of the things we were talking about a few minutes
Yeah.
ago. If you go back to the 1950s and you look at I think it was Operation Ajax, the overthrow of Mohammad Mossadegh, 1953, and you look at in the 1970s, the Islamic Revolution in Iran.
Yeah, it looked totally different. It was
totally
like
different. Exactly.
Women looked. It was like the term, I hate it, but the term progressive. How they're wearing like skirts and they like were like There's video footage of this shit. And then, do you think because people claim that that the again the Jews were essentially use Islam as like a broom to sweep away the crimes against humanity and the stuff that they do? Do you think because there's an idea they created the extremist element, this radicalized element of Islam, of the burqas and the things they do to women and controlling that aspect? What do you think about that?
Well, that's a really interesting question for two reasons. One, I get the essence of what you're saying. I'll respond to that. The other side of that's really interesting is that, from what I understand historically, the burqa and the idea of covering the body or covering the head is actually something that the Muslims derived from Christianity and their interpretation of the Bible. Because if you read the Bible, there are multiple references to, and I understand that the context might be praying, but it's the woman having to cover her head in the presence of God, which is why Jews wear yarmulkes to remind them that there's something above them, right? It's why you remember the famous haircuts of like the friars. They have
Friar Tuck, and he's got yeah.
There's nothing above them. You cut the hair off. It's just your head. God is above you, connected to you. It's not exclusive to the Jews.
I didn't actually think of it. Wow, that makes so much sense.
You cover your head in the presence of God. Now it's funny. Okay, let me tell you a little story. I shared that on my social media for the Secret Teachings, and I shared with my audience the verse from the Bible. I think it's in the book of Corinthians, covering your head as a woman. And someone said, "But Ryan, that only means that if you're praying in a church." And I said, "Yeah, you're right, it does." And they said, "Then why are you trying to relate that to Islam?" And I said, "Because there's context to provide to the verse, right?" So I said, "What's the verse in the Quran that says women have to cover their heads?" And then provide me the context to it. If you're going to do that with the Bible, you need to do that with the Quran. What is the context? So you're right. If you look back historically in places like Iran, women did not dress like that. Women dressed totally differently. In fact, Iran was what we would probably consider to be quite Western.
Yeah, I agree. There's video footage of it.
yeah, there's plenty of evidence and photographic and video evidence of that. So what's by the way, I looked it up to have some confirmation of this, so I know that I'm not telling people the wrong thing. It's in the book of 1 Corinthians about the head coverings. Mm-hmm. So Muslims, Islam is supposed to be an extension of Christianity. So Islam,
but they don't view it that way, though.
No, most Muslims do view it that way that I've talked to. Maybe not people that you've seen, but from what I understand, and people I've talked to, they see Islam as the continuation of the message of Jesus. They just believe that they have the right answers, which is, everybody says.
Of course.
But they get the idea of the head covering from the Christians. Okay, so let's go back to the idea of the Islamic Revolution and the question of what you proposed about the Jewish cult, let's call it.
Yeah.
They're all throughout the Middle East, just in my lifetime, it's been nothing but chaos and terrorism, at least from what we've been shown in the media, the news, right?
100%.
Remember the war in Iraq? Remember all the newspapers that said Saddam had weapons of mass destruction?
Not true.
There were babies that were ripped out of incubators, more baby stories that were fake, right?
Yeah.
Testimony to Congress, all fake.
Yeah, all of it.
Many of those stories were actually written by Jewish journalists that have an allegiance to Israel and to the plan that Israel and the neocons had back in the late 90s, which was part of the Project for the New American Century and Rebuilding America's Defenses. Two of the three founders of that were Jewish, and they had a plan, as General Wesley Clark said. It was
I was
Wesley
just
Clark.
about to bring him up because he said that he looked at and it was like, we're going to destroy whatever 7 or 9 countries. And conveniently, they all were Israel's
Enemies or
yes.
perceived enemies. Precisely, yes. And he said
Yeah,
he
Wesley
saw that at
Clark.
the Pentagon, and that was the plan to take out, quote unquote, take out 7 countries in 5
And he was
years.
so confused too, it seemed like.
And then that actually happened after 9/11. And remember, after 9/11, it was, oh, they found Qurans and the Muslims did this. And
It's dancing
there's
Israelis.
there's no mention of the dancing Israelis. They even that's even a hard newspaper article to find anymore. Or the fact that they were not just Israelis, they were Mossad agents that were sent to document the
And they had
attack.
propelling, like where you propel from a height. They had like harnesses and stuff. Why do they have the art students? Why'd they have those?
I never heard that. I don't remember reading about that.
There's art students that they found where they were doing this like essentially like some sort of art project in this building, and they found and then they just cleared it out and it was just like essentially a front for something, and there was like harnesses for them propelling in like elevators. They quotations they think is going on
In the World Trade Center?
Yeah, really weird.
Oh, okay. I think I know kind of what you're talking about. I never heard about the harnesses.
It's
But
weird, dude.
there are those 5 dancing Israelis, as they called them, went back to Israel and went on TV. There's video of it. They went on TV and said why they were sent over there. So
What did they say? Do you know what they said?
they were sent over there to document the event, I believe was
That's what I thought. Yeah,
was.
so crazy.
So then you have this continuation of the 1990s wars of the first Bush administration. You have the continuation of that. You have the extraction of resources. You have your oil. You have your drugs. Afghanistan with the opium fields, etc. That probably has something to do with the crisis that we have today. The opioid crisis we have today probably has something to do with that.
David, I called that stuff out as keeping the population under like a drug hypnosis and keeping them all drugged up so they never realize their full potential.
Yeah, that's certainly part of it. And then of course there's a relationship that shares with the alcohol stuff we were talking about earlier, the spirits and the possession. So okay, so we have the Islamic Revolution, we have Operation Ajax, we have a lot of history in the Middle East where we have the United States tampering with governments from
100%
Mohammed Mossadegh to Gaddafi, even Assad. In fact, I have a friend who's Muslim, and I knew bits and pieces of this. And I was having a conversation with her. This was probably like 7 years ago, in Boise, Idaho. She went to the university. She's from Saudi Arabia, and we were walking, and she told me that she said, "Look, she said the Saudis are horrible people." She said the royal family's horrible. She said they're like evil, and she said they're actually Jewish. Did you know they're Jewish?
I heard about that.
I said I've heard that. She said, yeah, they're not even actually real, I guess, Muslims or real Arabs. They're Jews. And they run Saudi Arabia, and they impose these strict, rules and laws she's like, that's not Islam. And then as we're talking, this was around the time, one of the stints where our government and our media in the West and the US were pushing how bad Syria was. Assad's bad, evil. They've got Assad in Call of Duty. You got to kill Assad. He's the bad guy.
Yeah.
And she said, do you know what Assad means? And I said, no. She said, it means like lion or something. I think it's something like that. Bashar al-Assad means lion. He's a great leader. She said, do you know how long he's ruled that country for? And I said, no, I don't actually. She said, his family's ruled the country for 3 decades, 30 something years. And I said, really? She said, yeah, don't you think it's weird that after they've ruled the country for 30 years, suddenly they're horrible people that have to be removed from power? And I said, yeah, we've done the same thing with Saddam. We gave him the green light initially to do the things that he did. We even gave him the freaking weapons, like
same with Bin Laden. Yeah.
Yeah. What was it? Bill Hicks, he said, how do they know they got the weapons? He's like, because we got the receipts, because we sold them to him.
Yep.
So I said, no, I didn't know that.
True.
I was aware of all these things. I just didn't know the specifics about Syria. And then I met some people from Syria, and I learned something else that was really interesting. And this will tie into everything else we've been discussing tonight. I met this girl from Syria because someone had said, hey, you talk about Syria on your radio show. You mentioned it. You should meet this woman from Syria. So I talked to this girl.
Before I get in, I just want to tell the audience and stuff like that. I have nothing against Muslims, even Jewish people. I look at things objectively, but when I see, I've always believed that these people on the large scale of things are being manipulated. Not every Muslim is strapped with a bomb, like what they used to make people perceive. I've actually stood up and spoke out a lot about Palestine and what's going on there. And I actually respected the Muslim religion until I saw some of the more radicalized positions that they were holding within certain government. But I've always thought it's not necessarily the people, it's the manipulation that is being used on them. And then all of like, I've never liked religion because of that, because this supremacy, whether it be Muslim supremacy, Jewish supremacy, Christian, whatever. Right. I just wanted the audience to know that I've had friends and talked with people all the different walks of life, but I've seen the radicalization of Islam in such a broad spectrum where it's taking over countries now, of full-blown dominance of like, you have to bow down to our gods. What is my problem with it? Right. So I just wanted to add that. That's like, I'm not
Understandably.
against Muslim people, but it's sad what's happening in the UK. Like I think it's terrible.
Understandably. And so when I met this girl from Syria,
Yeah,
she said,
yeah.
"Did you know that?" Well, this is in line with what you're saying and in line with everything else we've talked about. In essence, she said, "Did you know that?" We were talking. She said, "Did you know that Christians are welcome in Syria?" I said, "I've heard that." I said, "What's the deal with other religions?" She said, "Well, Syria is probably one of the very few areas of the I guess you could call it the Middle East. Syria is technically part of Asia, just like Iran is technically Western Asia. It's just one of the parts of the Middle East, that part of the world where everybody is relatively speaking, generally speaking, welcome."
Mhm.
And then you get this: if you actually go and you were to research like Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, if you were to research like Iran, yeah, there are extremist sects where you might be persecuted more so, both societally and even legally. You might not have as many rights if you are a Christian, but Christians are allowed. And in some places, not just allowed, in some places, Christianity make up a pretty good, decent portion of the population. That's contrary to the view that Christians are targeted and slaughtered all across the Middle East by the Muslims. It's actually kind of the other way around. It's the Jewish state or the Israeli state that slaughters Christians in places. Recently, you can look this up. NBC News reported that Christian villages intentionally targeted by Israel. Christians now face genocide after the overthrow of Assad in Syria. Will they now face genocide? They didn't face it before. Now they face it now that Israel has a connection.
Well,
Israel has
Jews hate
leadership in the
Christians,
country.
and from what I've read, they absolutely hate
Yes.
Christians. So
Yes. So my point is the manipulation. And I grew up in, the United States. I was 10 years, 11 years old during 9/11, and I grew up learning that Muslims believe X, Y, and Z. And all these countries
yeah.
are just barbarians and terrorists. It's like, well, there's a couple of things that we have to unpack here. We have to understand that Israel was founded on terrorism.
Yes, 100%.
Jews literally brought radical extremist zealotry, terrorist tactics to that part of the world as a foundational pillar by which they created their state. At the
Yeah.
very base minimum, Israel is parallel on the same ground as the perception they've created of Islam and all of these Muslim states, at the very bottom line,
Agreed,
at the very
agreed. Yeah.
least. Then you have to look at the US involvement, and that goes back to your question with Israel and the pushing of these narratives, which have resulted in everybody seeing in the West that Islam is the problem, which certainly in a lot of ways it is. But why is it the problem? And why, like in the Roman Empire, would Christians and Jews be persecuted in the places that they are? So why would that be? Well, because the American government and because Israel has created so much, as Ron Paul used to call it, blowback from
Yeah. I like Ron
murdering.
Paul.
I did too, slaughtering and killing and degrading and demeaning these societies and these cultures and these countries for so long that even, again, baseline minimum, we can understand a little bit why, if you are a Muslim, if you did grow up in one of these places and you learned what had happened to your people back in the 90s or the early 2000s, yeah, you can understand why they might feel the way that they do about Jews or about Christians or about the West or about the big demon that is the United States. It doesn't mean that I'm justifying it or I'm defending it. What it means is we need to see things from the other point of view to understand that these are people just like us.
I
And
agree.
what did we do after 9/11? Regardless of who was responsible, the country banded together and we said, we got to kill the people that killed us. Well, that's what they think too. We got to kill the people that killed us. And then you have to tack on the pushing of extremist Muslim ideology pushed by the West, as well as pushed by their own Muslim sects of people that want power. And you just get a powder keg that's ready to explode.
It's a never-ending snowball. That the snowball just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and then everybody gets crushed by it. A thing that I don't know, I probably didn't coin this, but like an analogy I thought of recently is the idea of like everyone is digging in their own graves, and then they're going to dig those graves big enough where they're clawing at the dirt because they don't even realize how big their graves are getting. They can't even get out now. And then everybody else falls into those graves. And that's what it seems like we're going as a society. And I didn't even think we were going to get in this direction of this conversation. And I actually really enjoyed it. Like, maybe in July or August, once the baby comes, I'm taking a month off the show, but I'm building up content so the fans won't notice the difference. But I'd love to have you back to talk more about this stuff, mythology, and because I know you're limited on time and stuff like that. But it is, I gotta say, I've had a lot of different guests on the show. It was something I never wanted to kind of do. It started out with me and my friends, and I was like, I'm gonna have some interesting people on that I can have these conversations with. And by far, you're probably one of the most interesting people that I've had on, at least in your takes of how you view things is very similar to how I view things, of really trying to be objective and not put my flag into the ground on a specific location,
I appreciate that. Thank you. And also, if you would like, I can do probably another 30 minutes if you would like to go a little bit longer, or if you want to hold it till next time, we can hold on to those ideas.
Maybe we should hold it on till next time. I think it might be interesting to kind of provoke the thoughts of the fans. And I'm not gonna lie, I feel bad for my dog. He's been probably down there just eating at his bone or whatever. But it's very interesting to me, some of the takes. Like we could probably do another 10, 15 minutes kind of thing. But like, it interests me of just like, I really appreciate the way you think. Because it's always the way I've tried to think. And once my kid comes, like, this is kind of like, I called it my last hurrah, where I'm going to have a couple of drinks tonight, and tomorrow I'm going to go out with my friends. We're going to go like target shooting, and I'm just going to kind of enjoy myself and enjoy the weekend. But after that, I plan to knuckle down to get extremely healthy, be working out, like essentially cut out weed and alcohol and all that stuff, and really focus on the inner temple and stuff like that, and really try to focus on health, because I know that I can achieve it. I'm pretty physical at my job anyway, but like, that's been always something that I've had, like a demon, that I've definitely have an addictive personality to some extent. And it is interesting how I would like to get to a place where you seem to be at, where you're kind of you're stationary in who you are, and what you're trying to achieve and what you're trying to be, and you don't let outside influences muddy the water, so to speak.
I try. That's all that we can do, is try. It's not always easy, but I try. Thank you for making some very kind statements. Thank you.
I just said, why not? Like, just at the end of this, like, what was the, like, can you tell the audience, because you're obviously in a kimono, right? That's what, is that specifically?
Oh, actually, I didn't even realize that that's what it looked like. It's like a jinbei. It's a summer outfit in Japan.
Okay. Because yeah.
I have a Godzilla shirt on underneath.
Oh, that's cool. I like that. That's sweet. I've always been fascinated by Japan and stuff like that too, and respected their national identity, and they believe in who they are and stuff like that. So could I just get a like, why you moved to Japan for the fans and the audience that don't know? I know, like, your wife's Japanese, you said, right? So like, what it fascinates you the most about Japan and the way they do things, and now that you're living there, because they would just, like, as an outside perspective, it's just fascinating.
It's really weird that there's probably a way to answer this question that kind of relates to everything else we've been talking about. Because we always have, and I'm sure that, I know the Japanese have their own perspective of America, just like Americans have their own perspective of Japan. You think of things like ramen, sushi, Godzilla, samurai, katanas, cherry blossoms, and the Japanese think like hot dogs, baseball, things like that.
Well, it's like with Canadians, all beavers, maple syrup, beer, fucking
hockey.
Yeah, hockey, and it's like, and that's why it's so funny because that's what I'm a nationalist. I am like I'm a Canadian nationalist. I love my country. My family's been here for fucking since the 1604, and then the 1700s on my other side, and so my family has deep roots in this country and building it, right? And it meant something to be Canadian. There was a distinct national identity, and it used to be shown on the ensign flag of what showed the French, Irish, and the French, Irish, Scottish, and English that built this country. Obviously, and you have what happened with the Indigenous. We can't change. It is what it is. We kind of have to move on. But they've equated our national identity like, oh, Tim Hortons and hockey and maple syrup, and that's not who we are as a people. Those are just consumer products. So it's kind of sad, but
Yeah.
same
The,
point
the,
of view.
it's kind of those kinds of things are comical.
Yeah,
But
I know.
I said that it's similar to what we were discussing earlier
Yeah,
because sometimes they're not comical, like in terms of how the West has viewed Islam and Muslim nations.
yeah,
But in the case of Canada with maple syrup, or the case of Japan with samurai or ramen,
mhm,
those are kind of comical things. Same thing with like hot dogs and baseball for Japanese.
yeah,
So I say
yeah.
that
That's so
because
true.
I had a perspective on Japan, like most Americans do, that was based on pop culture, and some of it's actually true, and then other things are totally not true. But the bottom line is, the point is, to answer your question, I was always fascinated with Japan, like a lot of Americans probably are, at least in pop culture. And I decided that I wanted to learn more about the culture a really long time ago because I was doing things in my life that people kept telling me that's really Japanese, like sitting on the floor and never wanting to, like, I didn't want to sit in a chair, I wanted to sit on the floor. Not that Japanese don't have chairs, they do,
Yeah,
but I didn't know what that meant when people said, "You're Japanese, you take your shoes off before you go in the house, you sit on the floor," like, and I was like, what do you mean that's Japanese?" And I learned a little bit about the culture, and that's actually not just a Japanese thing, it's a pretty universal thing. God tells Moses to take off his sandals, he's on holy ground. You go into any Buddhist temple, that's not
yeah,
just in
yeah,
Japan, take your
yeah,
shoes off, right? Or if you go to Joel's, was it Joel Osteen,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
his
Crazy
Texas,
Jules, dude.
his Texas church. He doesn't want any homeless people in there, or people during the hurricane, because they're going to damage his carpet.
Yeah,
So anyway, yeah. Long story short, I enjoyed the culture. I don't really watch any of the anime or stuff like that. I just enjoyed the cultural respect, and
yes,
I liked the language, and I always thought Japanese women were beautiful. So I ended up coming over here last year, and I
I
met
agree.
my wife, and that's pretty much it. And I feel more at home over here. That's pretty much the bottom
Do you
line. It's a
believe
lot.
in past lives? Do you think maybe you were Japanese in a past life?
I actually did a show on that. I don't know if I'd say Japanese, but I do have a very strong connection to Hiroshima. I don't know what that means. I just have a
Do you
really
think
strong
that do you think past lives
relationship.
are a real thing? Because I tend to that we may have like some people may have not. Some souls may be new souls, but I've always felt like I've been here before. Like even when on mushrooms, I was watching the Woodstock footage, and I was like, my wife was upstairs, and I was like, man, it's so crazy. I was like, do you think I lived back then? And she's like, you probably did all the drugs and died in the field while the musicians were playing. And I was like,
Maybe
probably,
it's like a maybe it's like a genetic memory, or it's an
yeah.
ancestral memory. Maybe it's not like we've, as an individualized soul, have lived before, but maybe we have these memories of our ancestors.
Well, I believe that it's like DNA, it's ingrained in who we are, right? Like all that, all even there's a guy named Jeremy McKenzie that I think is a very outspoken dissident of the government. He's been on the show twice now, and the way he explains things is very thought out, and the way he tries to interpret this nationalistic idea of who Canadians are and stuff like that, or anybody in some places, right? We talked about the Japanese actually, and he's like, I can't move to Japan, put on a kimono, and then understand the cultural nuances and have roots into the ground of what that country is. The same way of like Indians coming, we've Canada's literally been flooded with people from India, and we share nothing in common. In my opinion, not one thing in common at all. There's so many differences between our cultures. But the thing is with Canada and even just different people, it's like all of that comes from like the same your DNA. Like eventually, like my family, whoever came over here on a boat whatever, 1604, and before that I trace them to where America is now. So God knows how the hell they got here, and all the experiences and the things that they had to endure, and the struggles and survival and sacrifice, and then that's also in me now from all of those generations. It's been in like your DNA is like sentient. I believe that type of stuff where it's like inside of you now. You know, what do you think about that? Because like it's part of all of these ancestral lines are connected to us.
We say it's, it's in your blood. It's
Mhm.
in the family blood or the family tree to be really good at something,
Yeah.
or to be whatever it is that your culture is. Like, to be Japanese means to be Japanese. Nobody can come over here who's not Japanese and be Japanese. The same way
Mhm.
that I can't go be Russian, whatever that
Yeah.
means, because so many different anywhere you go in the world. I mean, there are like distinct racial groups where it might be close to 100% like pure in a sense, but like ultimately everybody's kind of a mix of something. And I can't go become some, except for America. America is one of those places where anybody can come and become an American, but that's different than if you were a Black American, or if you were an Indian
Well,
American,
that's
or
like Canada was like 98% white until like the 80s. Essentially, like since the concept of the country, a lot of people like it was built on multiculturalism. It wasn't though. It was built on the Europeans' multiculturalist society, a Eurocentric society that then blended together and made what we now know as a Canadian. And that's why I find it very sad when people are like, I can just show up here and become Canadian. And I'm like, because I'm on it says it on my passport. And I'm like, that's not, you can't become like who we are as a people and share the roots in this land the same way that I'm not Ojibwe, I'm not Mohawk, I'm not, because a lot of people are like, well, Canadians are the natives. I'm like, that's not true. They don't even identify as Canadian. A
yeah,
lot of them,
yeah.
they identify with the tribe they were associated with, the Iroquois. Like, so a lot
That's
of
like
stuff
with
comes into play.
Yeah, that's like with American history too. I wrote a book on American history called Liberty Shrugged. It's a really
Mhm.
big book, and in that book, I talk a little bit about this kind of thing.
Sure. Mhm.
If you're talking about like immigration, like the Democrats in the US will say that our country is built on immigration. Well, like kind of, but when you have immigrants that were Chinese, or you have immigrants that were German or whatever they are, Italian, they built things and worked really hard. They came here with little to nothing. The Chinese built our railroads, and they didn't just walk into the country and get handed a bunch of stuff. That's
Yep.
obviously, the that's obviously the context that's not provided by the people that distort history like that.
Like even in
Uh,
Canada, everyone's like the Chinese built the railroads. Most people don't know it was a lot of Irish and Scottish also, but the Chinese were paid and then they were sent home. So like a lot of people don't know
in
about that
Canada?
stuff. Yeah, yeah, they were
Yeah,
like,
I
okay,
didn't know that in
thank
Canada.
you, bye bye, like, which is crazy because they didn't want to do the dangerous work. So like, oh, these we'll pay these cheap Chinese, they'll do it, and they did it. So
Well, if you think about even the idea of what it means to be white, this is
yeah,
a relatively, probably the last thing we'll have time to talk about, but
yeah,
this
yeah,
is a
for
relatively
sure.
new term. Like, it's relatively new in terms of the interpretation or the perception of like the idea of being white.
Yeah, yeah.
Because for example, if you think about we talked about the Roman Empire.
Mhm.
um, the Roman Empire was vast, and it lasted well, actually thousands of years. The Republic lasted maybe a hundred, if we're lucky, a couple hundred maybe. But the Roman Empire was vast, and it included parts of Africa, it included parts of Asia. And like when I grew up, I took advanced placement history, and all I was ever told in class, and then also in entertainment, is that like the Romans were a bunch of like really big white guys in armor that just were took over places and killed people and raped people. It's like, that's really stupid. They weren't all white, and they were Rome was a very multicultural society. The idea of Rome, like the idea of America or the US, what became the United States,
I heard
was
that's
the idea
was the downfall though.
that well, maybe to some extent, but
Yeah,
the idea that everybody's kind of welcome and we all contribute to a not a communistic greater good, but a societal greater good, or a nationalistic greater good, or the idea of Rome was for people to be free and equal, and for the law to be applied equally to everybody, regardless of what your
yeah.
views were, what you looked like. And that is That is true. Rome was that. In fact, Rome was probably that longer than the United States has been that. And so
Mhm.
when people say that, we think of Rome as the West, although it included a lot of the East as well, or parts of the East, at least the fringes of the East. It's like, what is even the Middle East? Like, Iran is not the Middle East. Iran is Western Asia. Syria is Western Asia. The perspective of where you view things is really important.
Yeah,
So my
Iran gets its name from Aryan too.
Yeah, they used to be white. That's where we get the idea of Aryans from, exactly. So the idea of what I'm getting at here is that if a lot of people in the conservative media today will say that it's Western Christianity that built the West. No, that's fundamentally flawed and incorrect, because the Roman Empire and what we consider to be Western Christianity is based on, if we're talking about Rome, Greek philosophy. The Greeks were not, and I don't think today consider themselves to be, white people. Likewise, Christianity came about 100 years as it was institutionalized in Rome and the West before the Western Roman Empire fell, which means that we're talking hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before Christianity. Rome was built on these principles, which were based on Greek philosophy, and the Greeks are not white. So Western civilization coming from Rome, or however we interpret that to be in Europe, is not a white-based system. It's a universal system where multiple different kinds of people came together and created something. Western society is not based on Christianity, but Christianity played a pretty important role in establishing these kinds of things that we call civilization in the West. It wasn't white people, it wasn't Christianity, but that doesn't mean that it's black people and that it's Islam. It means that there's a multi-cultural, multi-dimensional, multi-societal, etc., combination of things that come together that creates civilization.
Yeah, I agree to some extent, but like, the one last thing kind of thing. Do you like? Because I'm a believer that white people deserve their own homelands, as in general, whether that be Irish, the Irish deserve Ireland to be their home country. One of my co-hosts is from Ireland, and they're being literally fucked. Like their culture, they've been there for thousands upon
Yes,
thousands of years.
Ireland is under a very oppressive assault. I agree
Yeah.
with you.
Same with the UK. Like I've always we did the Kalergi plan. They wrote about this 100 years ago to make everyone into a mud race, quote unquote, of low IQ, animalistic type people that would just be ruled over by like Jews, essentially. And I read a lot into that, and it seems like that's exactly what is happening. And the guy that wrote it, he was part of the UN and all that stuff too, and the creation of it, as far as I'm read into it. But I believe in like that. Like now you're seeing or black people being like, we need to take our homelands and go to Africa because we want our own black society and African society or African country, which they already, there's tons of countries in Africa that are just black people. South Africa, when the South Africans, the Africans, when they went there, there was no tribes there. So there's not this colonization. As far as I read, there was no tribes. They just found land and built shit. And it is interesting because you start to see this. I believe it's part of a divide and conquer tactic, the cultural Marxist shit, which eventually, this is a tough thing to get into at the end of this, but I just wanted to like, I truly believe that everyone deserves their own homelands to some extent. And I think we're going to see more and more division because I think in some regard, diversity causes division. You have too many people, different ideologies, religions, ethnicities, languages, and they all try to get pushed together. If everyone's in a homogenous society where they are alike, I think those countries thrive more often, and we've seen that in history. But there can be this homogenous society of black and Asian and white people together. In some regard, even in the 90s, Canada was like that, where everyone collectively was like, okay, we're going to work hard to make this nation into something great and keep it that way after the people that built it. But it is sad to see what's being done all around the Western
Well,
world. And I think
if
it's
we
a
have a
destruction of it.
if we have a goal as a
Yeah.
society and as individuals to reach this point in development, whatever that development is, whatever the ultimate goal of society is, and we're all working toward that, then it doesn't matter who we are, what we look like, where we come from. The problem obviously is when you've got one, people that are entitled, you've got two, people that use immigration as a political tool or
Yeah.
as even as a military tool. And also when you have people that, even if they're not bad people, they're not being used in those ways, they're just a little bit ignorant, or
Mhm.
maybe they're a little bit self-centered, or whatever the case might be. They might not even be immigrants. I mean, Russia, Japan, other countries are having trouble with streamers, like live streamers. People come over here to Japan, they're not really bad people, they're just clout chasing, and they do really dumb stuff. And then that changes the perspective of
Yeah.
Japanese on foreigners, and it creates probably a little bit of hatred or disgust. I mean, I'm not Japanese, and I'm disgusted by some of the things these people do over here.
Mhm.
So I firmly believe, if I have to state a belief, if I'm going to state a belief, I'm not going to go as far as defending, like, outright say everybody deserves, like, a specific homeland for one group or another, because I don't know what it means to be black. I don't know what it means to be white. I don't know what it means to be Asian, because there's so many different Asians, so many different blacks, so many different
Yeah.
whites. I get the concept of what you're saying. I try to stay neutral in that because I really don't know, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I think what's most important is culture, and trying to be a if you're going to live in a different culture, like I am, a very distinctly different culture,
Mhm.
I try to adapt and abide by the culture.
This is what I'm saying, right? And
That's most
that
important.
I agree. I agree. I agree. Because it didn't matter. Like I did a video where I was like, "This is Toronto, Canada." In the 90s, and I was like, I was like, obviously, I was like, I did another video. I was like, it's in the 1950s. I was like, what do you notice? There's a lot of white people. And I kind of talked about like the communist agenda. Pierre's father was a communist, and he signed the Immigration Act to essentially flood the country with people that were not from Europe or didn't want to assimilate to our culture and stuff like that. And I even pointed at the 90s. I was like, this is a time, because I grew up then. I was born in 91. My family was from Toronto. My grandfather was a firefighter, a chief in Toronto. And it was, yeah, a multiculturalist city, but was everyone got along and adapted to what the Canadian culture was, and the more that like, and if we flood in too many people in it, people don't assimilate, and that's what my kind of point was, that you can have like a cohesive um, society built on homogeneity, even if it is people of different colors and races, religions, language. Like I wouldn't say languages. Everyone should speak a fundamental the same language if they're coming to that country, right? But like it has to be a cultural thing. Like they have to accept. If I really liked India for some reason, I would go there, and like Japan. I've said this on the show before. If I really found Japan interesting and I really wanted to live there, I would adapt to and assimilate to their culture.
That's the most important thing, which is also why I've been highly critical of very political movements in the United States, be it Trump or anything else, because it doesn't matter who the president is. It really doesn't even matter, if we're talking about culture, who members of Congress are. What matters is, what is the culture like? And a president is not going to change the culture. A Congress is not
Yeah,
necessarily
yeah.
going to change the
People.
culture. The culture is an individual thing, and it's also something that is, I think, in part programmed by entertainment and by
Mhm.
media. And if you can be excited that Trump's the president, Trump's doing great things, we can debate those things, but ultimately it's irrelevant, because if the culture doesn't change, it doesn't matter what Trump does. It doesn't matter what Biden did. It doesn't matter what the next president does or doesn't do. It'll be irrelevant to the fact that we have a culture of degeneracy in the United
Yeah,
States.
I agree.
And that's the problem. That's
And if
largely
they can, yeah, and if they can manipulate, because that they manipulate people through social media, television, Hollywood, uh, Talmud would, because somebody else commented once, like who is actually controlling things, and they can push and sway. You see this in black culture. Like, I am a hip hop artist, right? I make controversial music, and like we were talking about ancestry. My grandfather was an artist. I can draw. My grandfather used to do, his name was Tom Thompson. He used to do paintings like the famous painter Tom Thompson here in Canada. Very similar, was able to do it. He was a jazz singer. So the stuff is like inside of me. Even probably doing stuff like this is just ingrained into my head. He was very political, and he got me into the whole researching into wars, one side, and then eventually it led me to the other side. But I just wanted to kind of end it of this idea that, like, yeah, people, we've been so manipulated and brainwashed. We're like before, like in Canada, right? Like everyone knew what it meant to be Canadian. We felt like a big family. There wasn't this big manipulation on television to some extent, but it's because people adapted and brought the same level of intellect and working hard and attempting to just build a country. It didn't matter a lot of times where people came from, right? I have an aunt that's Jamaican, came from Jamaica, adapted, became a Canadian, what it means to be Canadian. And I think that needs to be taken into context. But you see this now in the Black community. I was going to say quickly is like the hip hop culture is just Jewish subversion culture. Like they're the ones that owned all the record labels and were like, yeah, go shoot each other and fucking shake your ass. All that stuff was created not by Black people, but by the record executives. And it's like just sad.
That is unfortunately a very large part of the problem in what we call Black society.
Yes.
Thomas Sowell wrote in one of his books that, and it's statistically verifiable, that after the Civil War, within about 35 years roughly of the Civil War by the turn of the century, so this is post-Civil War, this is Reconstruction era. And I actually talked about this in my book, Liberty Shrugged. The Black society or the Black communities or community in the United States was a very, very spiritual and a very, a lot more educated because they could be educated. They went from 0 to 50% literacy in 30-something years. Blacks had, I think, even stronger marriages statistically than whites did, whatever white's supposed to mean. They built churches, they built educational centers, schools, contrary to the Democrat view. And I think, frankly, the Jewish promoted idea that there was never a form of reparations given to Blacks. That's false. The Republican Party did actually provide reparations to the immediate slaves or descendants of slaves, like the next generation, through the Freedmen's Bureau. The Democrats tried to stifle it, but the Freedmen's Bureau, which was run by the Republican Party more so than by Lincoln or something. People think Lincoln was the main one. He wasn't. It was the Republicans in Congress, the House and the Senate, that ran the Freedmen's Bureau, and they did give reparations to those people. The reparations thing is very similar to the Holocaust payments for survivors. It's very similar to Black suffering is unique, Jewish suffering is unique. No, it's not.
I think it's pitting everyone against each other. And even we'll have to end this, but like I looked into something about like, okay, how many Black people existed in America in like 1776 or something like I think there was something like that. There's like 2% of the population, and how many people of those 2% of the population were descendants of slaves was 26% of 2% of the population. So it wasn't this grandiose thing that people think it was, and it's funny because they still complain about slavery, even though the word slave comes from Slavic, of the Slavic people being slave. Which is so the people have been so polarized and conditioned, and that's why I think this whole interesting where this talk went, because I didn't know what we were going to get into. I actually thought I was going to ask you questions about like serial killers. I had a couple of ideas and like magic and the occult and stuff like that, but I'm actually glad where the direction of the conversation went, because like people need to stop holding on to these victim mentalities and stuff like that, and realize that, I don't know, collectively, either tribalism exists in one form or exists in no form. Like we can't have these different nuances and people like, whoa, we want this, and then other people want that.
There's nothing wrong with tribalism in the sense that you want to live in a community of people that look and act like you and believe the same things. There's a difference, however, between living in that community because you choose to and living in that community because it's mandated by policy like segregation or some form of forced immigration.
One last thing, did you ever hear about, like, because I read into this stuff and I heard that like essentially like barely any actual whatever like white American people that weren't of Ashkenazi descent owned slaves. It was the majority of people that owned slaves were Jewish, and they would actually close on Jewish holidays and stuff like that.
It depends on where you're looking. So in the Dutch colonies, yes, most of the Dutch colonies were, I think it was a third or more were Jewish run, the slave trade. And they did shut down slave auctions on Jewish holidays because nobody would have showed up. In the United States, it's a very convoluted thing. I don't know if it's the owners per se, but I do know that a lot of the slave ships were owned by Jews,
Mhm.
and the financiers, of course, going back to that usury thing we talked about, were largely Jewish uh, financiers. Or, I mean, slavery was a corporate system with the plantations and the ships and all of this. But then again, you have to look at, the Muslims actually probably transferred more slaves than ever came through the Atlantic
100%.
slave trade.
The Ottoman
And then,
Empire enslaved tons of people.
oh yeah, and like you said, Slav. But to leave the audience with something magical for our next
Yeah.
conversation,
Yeah, I'm
what you
excited
said
for that.
about the word slave, I mean, this is magic. Or like alcohol, the origin of the word, that is magic. Because, like, for example, if you were to write something, you write something down, well, you're writing, and that is a rite, as in a rite or a ritual. And when you're writing, you're spelling, so you're casting a spell.
Spell.
And when you're writing in cursive, it's a curse, right? So these are very important things that we never think of. We call it maybe twilight language or something to that effect. Something Jordan Maxwell kind of popularized, the idea of
Yeah,
these
like
types of things. But that is magic, and that is in the word slave, like Slav, or it's in the word Holocaust, because a Holocaust doesn't mean killing a bunch of people.
it
It
means
means
burnt
killing a
off.
bunch of people by fire. So what happened to Jews, 6 million or otherwise, is not really a Holocaust. And if it is a Holocaust, then everybody else who died alongside of them likewise died in a Holocaust, not just 6 million. What's that?
Yes.
Far less than 6 million.
Yeah,
Or
we
what
know that.
what the Royal Air Force did to Dresden was a
Yes.
literal Holocaust.
Yes.
200, 300,000 burned alive in fires that were so massive that they basically lit the atmosphere on fire, is what it looked like from
Yeah.
the Royal Air Force pilots and the American pilots. And that's the same thing they did to Tokyo. They burned
Mhm.
40% of Tokyo before they bombed Hiroshima, and they did that with experimental napalm like incineraries.
I was just talking about this before on a Patreon episode before we started of like I did a review of Kanye West's new song and I was talking about like how
I
they
like it.
didn't it's kind of hilarious, man. It
It's
was the
hilarious.
ending was like catchy and I was like, man, nigga, how I was like, oh my god, this shit is wild that he did this. And so I was like talking about it and talking about the war and stuff like that and Hitler as a person. And I think he's kind of control opposition and stuff like that, that like maybe a Rothschild. There's so many different nuances to that whole conversation we can get into another time. But I just said like that never needed to happen. The war was coming to an end. They're like, let's just try this fucking bomb out. And essentially, from what I've taken, that's what they did. They're like, they didn't need to do that.
On Hiroshima.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a really interesting story, not only because the bomb, well, they bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. One of the bombs might have actually been a bomb that the Germans built with assistance from the Japanese. I'm not saying it was, I'm saying it might have been. This is part of the theory of the missing U-boat and the uranium that went missing toward the end of the war. That maybe they dropped one of those bombs that was meant for Manhattan on Japan that had been
Can
built
we
by the
yeah,
Japanese.
let's talk about this next time. Because I could talk to you for hours, but we'll bring it to a
They did
close
use it they did use it as an experiment, though, to experiment
for
with
sure.
humans.
And one last thing. So I was just gonna, so when I'm writing rhymes and I'm creating music and stuff like that, you think I'm making a magical spell?
It is, that's what music is, and that's where the word comes from. It comes from the muses, like
Yeah.
museum, music, musician.
Interesting. My music's pretty controversial. I like I have songs called Conspiracy Theory where I dive into like Mossad shot JFK with the help of the CIA. Chemicals in the water are turning the freaking frogs gay, and I do stuff like that. And I've talked about like the whole idea of like the replacement kind of theory and what's going on in the world. So interesting. I'm like
The real
writing.
UN document.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, oh yeah, for sure, right? And I brought that up. I did a video that got me banned from TikTok for showing that. I was like, "Oh yeah, it's just." I said it, and they're like, "Oh, this is just like a coincidence that the UN has a real document of this." I showed it behind me, and then instantly just banned, wiped out. I was like, "All right, well,
That
I've
works.
done this 20 times." So, but I appreciate you having you on. Like I said, you were one of the most interesting guests I've had on, and I find you very easy to talk to and easy to have a conversation with. And there's always more and more things I want to ask, just because your thoughts are interesting to me. And I'm aware of a lot of the stuff that you talk about, but not fully in full context and detail of what you've looked into. I like that you look at things objectively. You're not swayed towards a certain angle like a lot of people are. Like I've had guests on that I do enjoy having on that maybe are fixated on Christianity or another type of that kind of realm of this is my focus and what I truly believe. And I've always tried to question everything. So I appreciate you coming on. I would love to have you on again, especially when I get everything settled down with the kid at some point. Like we'll figure something out. It might be July, August, September, something like that. But definitely would love to have you back on. But let the audience know where to find you. And I'm sure they're going to really enjoy this conversation.
Yes, thank you for having me on. And if you would like to find my show, it is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It's called The Secret Teachings. It is available on my website, tstradio.info, or you can type in TST Radio on pretty much any platform like Apple, Spotify, etc. Spreaker is the main platform. The free archive is
That's where
on
we're
the
on too,
website.
like-
It's got all the links. I'm sure you'll put the links and whatnot in the show description or something to that effect. There's advertisements in it, so we drive people to subscribe to the ad-free show on the website, which has more than just the show. It has the document archive, which has documents like that UN replacement document. It's got the document you can look at. You can download it directly. That's part of our article archive, videos, montages, etc. tstradio.info. If you want to contact me, rdgable, rdgable@yahoo.com. And although we've been banned from a lot of things over the years, we have an X page, which is a new one because we got banned before, a Facebook
Yeah, I
page,
saw that.
which has not been banned, surprisingly. And YouTube is surprisingly back up. So I put a few things up there. It's all linked up, tstradio.info.
Awesome. Yeah, that's good because we've danced the line with YouTube. I'm quite sure. Our protocol episodes is still up. Fingers crossed it stays up. They tried to
That's
take
magic.
they tried to take it down, and then I appealed it. And I think it's just the way I was like, this is not anti-Semitic or whatever. I just try to really phrase things of like, hey, like we're just questioning things and showing you, hey, look at this weird video. But yeah, I appreciate everybody that joins. Obviously, support the show on Patreon. We have new merch designs that we just developed that are pretty fun. So everybody go check those out. And yeah, you can find everything in the link tree, and I'll make sure that all of Ryan's stuff is in the bottom. And yeah, everybody out there, stay strange.